But I'm Melanie Breaux. I work for an organization that's called the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development. It's also, like, the acronym is ANHD, if anybody knows that. We are an advocacy organization that works with 100 different member groups scattered throughout the city. So we don't necessarily do any direct organizing, but we work with groups that do. Probably one of the most well-known ones is Make the Road New York. They're one of our member groups, as well as CASA, New Settlement Apartments, New Settlements for Safe Apartments. So a lot of our work centers around affordable housing advocacy as well as equitable economic development. So, and maybe a little bit more background on me is that my initial background is in journalism. I went to Ithaca College to study that. If anybody knows the Park Center for Independent Media, shout out to that. Fantastic, yeah. So they're a great organization. Props to Independent Media. And yeah, so I've worked for a few different media outlets. I've written for a few places. But then decided to kind of transition into more social justice communication work. So I've been doing that for the past 5 years at various types of organizations, mostly focused on community organizing spaces and things like that. So if you want to learn anything else about me, welcome to ask me questions afterwards. I'm an open book. Maybe one other plug I'll do is that I also am on the board of an organization that's called Women in Action in the Media. It's the New York chapter of that board, if anybody knows it, WAM NYC. Yep, so not the band. But yeah, so feel free to ask me questions about that. You may have gotten emails from me before. Here's the face of those emails. Anyway, so I'm going to stop talking about myself. I guess I want to get a very quick sense of who's in the room. So maybe how many of you are actual communications people at an organization, communications staff? Yeah, okay. How many of you are activists, working on your own, kind of trying to cobble together some of these skills? Okay, most of you. Okay, great. How many of you are actual media professionals, let's say journalism, reporters or anything? No. Okay. Is there any other? Are there? Maybe I'll do topics. Are all of you kind of focused on abolish ICE kind of subjects, or is there other specific issues?
Housing.
Huh?
Housing.
Housing. Great.
Youth, empowerment and education.
Sweet. Great. Yeah.
Police accountability.
Police accountability. Great. Same.
Kavanaugh.
Great. Okay.
Affirmative action.
Affirmative action. Decarceration. Sweet. Any reproductive rights stuff in the room, or just for personal fun? Yeah.
And voting rights.
Voting rights. Cool. Environmental rights. Okay. So various subjects. Cool. Okay. So did you all get the handout that was going around for the press release? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I also have an additional handout, but maybe let's pull this guy up that was getting passed around. So it's two sides. I just wanted to go over this. So as Andy was saying, something like a press release is something that comes out. It's not necessarily an afterthought, but a lot of times when you're working with different organizations, they'll work on the press release kind of after they've crafted their story, or they'll start to think about what kind of press they want to have come to a specific event. It's all kind of intermixed with as you're either planning an event that you want to get some press to, or you have a big report come out with some really interesting information, or something super egregious happened in the news and you want to go protest that particular thing happening, and you want to get some press to cover your angle of that story. So when you're kind of thinking about what to go into that press release, think of it as part of a larger kind of media strategy for it. So for example, if you are wanting to go protest abolishing ICE in front of like a detention center or something like this. When you are kind of going through the planning of that event, a piece of that obviously is like figuring out like, okay, so what press do you want to have like come to this particular event? And that's when you start to think about like your messaging in terms of like what's going to be appealing for that like particular audience. And what's going to be appealing maybe to different types of audiences. So a lot of this is making sure that the information that you're presenting is as like simple as possible for like a general audience to understand, and really getting to the heart of what like you want them to like take away from that, and getting to that as soon as possible, which I'm pretty sure that like the previous presenter was like talking about as well. Like you want to make it as easy as possible for journalists because they're trying to like cover a gajillion things and trying to like get it all out there. So you just got to be like, look at this gorgeous thing, and like, oh, it has everything right there. So like this is a like kind of like standard format of it, but I wanted to kind of like go through the individual pieces of it. So the first part is obviously like the headline that's at the top of it. We're actually going to do that last because your headline is something that you should do last, and I'll get to why later. But then you obviously have like immediate release, the date of it, your like press person's information, and I would encourage like if you're going to be like out for like a whole day, don't put your office number because like they're not going to be able to reach you if like they all of a sudden see it and you're already out there. Put your cell phone number. So that's just like a little quick tidbit. And then city and state, and then what I kind of wrote up here is this is kind of what it'll look like. But these are the different pieces. So that first paragraph is going to be the most important. And that's going to be, it's meant to be simultaneously like compelling and interesting for someone to want to look at it. But it also has to like get to the point like very, very quickly. Because if a like reporter or if someone is getting this like into their like, into their inbox in the morning, they're gonna like read that first paragraph, and if you don't hook them in that first paragraph, they are just going to like be like, nah, that's fine, and just like skip it. I know Andy had said something about like if you want to do like questions throughout or at the end. I'm happy to like if you have like an immediate question off of something that I said, feel free to raise your hand. So yeah, and we can kind of like go into more of like what that means to like be engaging. But the best piece of advice that I can give you, honestly, is answer the question, who cares? Like, who cares? Am I allowed to swear? I'm not allowed to swear.
Yes.
I am allowed to swear. So, like, who gives a shit? So, like, you have to just make sure that you are, like, answering that question, like, pretty immediately. Because that's what the reporter is going to be thinking in their head, is like, okay, like, why do I give a shit about this particular protest that makes it feel different from like another protest. So that's like the main thing that I will say. And it's also a good idea to not just run this by like the people in your space, but if you happen to have someone else who's like not immediately within that space, who can read it as well, who can like talk it out with you as you're kind of crafting it together, then that's a good idea too. So just kind of bouncing ideas off of people is like a really great idea to be able to like flesh it out. And it's okay as well when you're kind of putting this together to put too much at first and then you can take away later. Like don't try to censor yourself at first when you're like initially crafting this. Like you want to make sure that you like put all the things that you think you're going to need in it, and then afterward you can start to cut down if it's becoming too long. The standard length for a press release is 1 to 2 pages. And that includes all of the quotes, which again, we'll like get to like the quote part, but like do not go over 2 pages because it's just, if you can't like have it printed out on like a double-sided piece of paper, you have to cut some stuff for sure. And so like this says, the other paragraphs are supposed to be supporting information. This means like this is where you can kind of get into like figures if you want to, or if you want to get into like any kind of like data points or anything to like supplement your first paragraph about why this is so important. And we're gonna like do an activity at some point that like kind of involves this, which I may not have enough handouts for, but that's okay. Y'all share. Where basically what you want to do is you want to include like people seem to like respond to figures, right? Respond to data. Oh, there was 72,000 overdose deaths last year. That's like a significant number, and that's like really crazy. Or there were 100,000 protesters at this particular event. Wow, that's amazing. What you also need to do though is kind of put those numbers in context. Put them in layman's terms. Put them in like the most simple language. So an example that I gave, and these are based off of, like I said, I do a lot of stuff related to like housing and racial disparities in banking and in small business work and things like that. So that's why those examples are there. But so, you want to include some of those figures, but you want to like I said, give them context. So saying something like here where it says in the third paragraph, 22% of New York City's population is Black and 29% is Hispanic, yet fewer than 7.6% of all loans went to Black borrowers and 7.9% to Hispanic borrowers. That sounds like it's probably a big deal, but like if you don't have the sentence before it that's racial disparities in lending persist and are getting worse, you don't have something like that to give whatever the figure is context, then it's just going to like pass over the reporter as they're looking at this. This is along the same lines of what I was saying before, always like thinking of the question like, who cares? Why do I care? Why do I care that there's only like 7.6% of all loans being given to Black borrowers? What does that matter? That kind of stuff. Maybe I will pause there for like a second because I know there was a lot of people who just came into the room. But does anybody have a question about those like initial paragraphs? Yeah.
I feel like I understand in practice, but just in theory, I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding the difference between just the theory of a press release and the theory of just an article. Is the main difference tense? Is it tone? Is it content?
That's a good question. It's kind of all of those things. You can use the same like principles and the same like methods or information that you would in an article. But what you're really doing is you're maybe and I don't want to use the word like sensationalized per se, but you're making it maybe a bit more like compelling so that you're wanting people to like you're trying to like hook them and give them some information about it, but you don't want to give them necessarily the whole story. You want to give them like a little bit, so as Andy was saying that like if they can't go to your event, they'll still have enough to like produce something, so at least there's something out there about whatever it is that you want them to come to. But you also want to make them want to come to it. You want to come to my protest where 100,000 people are going to be, because then you'll get this great story about, this like one mother who like was, taken away from her child or like whatever it is. So yeah, I would say like use the same kind of elements, but you're also bridging it. Like the length is maybe like a big difference because you're making it only a page or 2 pages. And you want them to be like shorter paragraphs, so you're not going as in depth in them. Makes sense. Cool. Is there any other questions? Oh, yes. Oh.
So, how do you describe the different approach between
A press release and a press advisory? That's a good question. So, so this has to do with timing. So a press advisory or a media advisory usually goes out a few days before an event is happening. And you usually will reserve that for, you can send this to your whole press list if you want to, but a lot of times organizations will sort of save that for their like like bigger deal people, like if you happen to have New York Times contacts, or you have like people at Democracy Now!, or you have like other types of contacts, you will usually have that go to them, and those will also usually follow up with a like conversation with those reporters, or at least you'll try to. You'll try to do some follow-up, like, hey, I sent this, and you call up Telemundo to be like, hey, I just sent you like a press or a media advisory about this event. Do you think you'll be able to like have somebody come? That is usually what will happen. It has most of the same information, if not the like exact same information in it. But it's obviously like looking forward toward that event, if that makes sense, or to that release. So you're saying like in, this week we will be doing this thing, versus a press release usually will go out the morning that you're doing the thing. And it's already kind of phrased as, we did this thing, so-and-so amount of people were arrested, like that sort of deal. These are not like hard and fast rules. These are kind of just like the general stuff. But it's sort of like, as Andy was saying, like it's for the purposes of like, if someone can't come to your event, they still have enough information to be able to like put a little like newswire thing up about it. And if you can have like any like photos, if you want, like you can do photos in a press release and just sort of like put them at the bottom if you want to, if you happen to have them. But again, you don't necessarily have to, and you can like follow up with those people after the fact. Does that make sense? Kind of the difference between a media advisory and a press release. They're a little bit like hard to like distinguish sometimes, and that's okay. It's mostly just like making sure that you're like you want to try and not necessarily bombard a particular reporter or particular outlet too much with your stuff, but at the same time you do want to like say that I really do think this is something that you are going to want to cover in particular, that sort of thing. Okay. The last paragraph on this also talks about quotes. So the thing that I will say about quotes is there's not really like a hard and fast rule in terms of how many quotes to have. I'd say like, having at least like 3 is probably like a good idea. You want to list them though in order of like the person's like importance. So if you get a council member, or you get a politician, or you get some other high profile person to like agree to be quoted in your press release, definitely put them at the top. Because you want that reporter to see like, oh, Bill de Blasio like is quoted in this press release, I really need to like fucking pay attention. So like that's definitely what you want. If you're an organization and this is something that your organization is producing, it is definitely like standard practice to have the executive director quoted in a press release, or the like upper level whoever at that particular organization. Also something to recognize too is like you really want to get diverse voices in there too if you can. So if you're covering something like, for example, a lot of my work has to do with housing, we make sure that we have like tenants quoted in this. And you can have Spanish and English in there if you want to. Especially if like the person who like is quoted actually did give their quote originally in Spanish, you can include that first and say, this was translated into English, so it's like either not exact or what have you. But yeah, so that's the rule when it comes to quotes. You might run into a situation where like everybody and their mother wants to be quoted in it, which like you let it be 5 pages or whatever it is, because so-and-so council member had to be quoted in it. Well then, freaking so-and-so council member has to also be in it, and like da-da-da-da-da-da. So you can have it be longer than 2 pages if you end up getting like a lot of important people who want to be quoted. You'll sometimes see this on like any of the like city websites where they have their press releases up, and then it's just a long scrolling list of like all kinds of quoted people because they just had to say something, which is fine. but yeah, those are generally the rule of thumb. In terms of like timing, like you're planning for this, I kind of say it in here, but if any of you have ever dealt with council members or dealt with politicians before, trying to get things from them, it takes a freaking village, and it also like just takes a really long time, just in general, so like plan for that. Press offices are usually pretty good that if you like say, we are releasing it this day, we need your like your quote like by so-and-so time, they're usually pretty good. You'll probably need to probe them a bit, so like lie and say you need it like Monday, but really you like don't actually need it till like Tuesday, end of day, just to like save yourself some like freaking headaches. But a lot of times you'll see organizations like have like do quotes at the very end, but at the same time you want to like start to have those conversations with those people like throughout this process. Like if you know you want to have like a particular like politician, for example, come to your rally because it's involving their district or it's involving their constituents or what have you, obviously that conversation happened like back when you were planning the event, so they know that you're gonna like need a quote for the press release. Also proofread those, like for real though, because a lot of times they like throw that together real fast, and if you are proofreading someone else's quotes, if there are grammatical errors, you don't have to turn them. But if it's like, if you think their messaging is off from what you're trying to convey, don't be afraid to reach out to them and say, hey, you know, you said this, but I think like, you know, we have to be a little sensitive about this. Would you be willing to kind of like rephrase it like this? And give them an example of how you would want to rephrase it, because a lot of times they'll just be like, yeah, that's fine. But if you don't do it for them, they're going to be irritated. If it's like a higher profile person, for example, usually like if it's someone you're like closer with or another kind of person on your level, they'd be willing to like do it without you having to do it. But maybe if you want to save yourself the heartache or the headache of like having to go back and forth over and over again, just do it yourself. But that's kind of like a general rule for that. Any questions? Yeah.
Usually, like, where in the press release is a good starting point to include a quote? Does it really matter? Like, where?
They usually come at the end. They're always at the end. Yeah.
Like very last paragraph end?
Very last paragraph ends. Yeah. If you have like a really big deal person and you want to put them like in the like higher up or in the middle, then you can. But standard practice usually is like you have like 3 paragraphs of your information and then starts the quotes. And you can just do them as like literally like the formatting of it is just a block of text that, you know, and then what I usually do is I will bold the part where it says said so-and-so title so that sticks out in the press release. And also use formatting in a press release too if you like want to like bold your like main point, because reporters are also like really going to be like scanning the bolded parts. They're going to see like, oh, okay, this headline kind of hooked me in. Oh, okay, so that like that main point that you made, that's cool. And then they'll kind of look down and be like, oh, okay, well, Bill de Blasio is like signing off on this, so maybe I should pay attention. And then they'll go back and like actually read it. So that's what I would say to do. Yeah.
Sometimes I struggle with like if I'm writing a quote for an executive director or a lead person, making it different from the context I've given above.
Yeah.
I realize that they're a person and they speak from like a personal voice.
Yeah.
But I'm like, how many ways can I say that they're condemning this or whatever? And I'm just, sometimes it's just too repetitive. And I wonder if you have any tips on how to write, when you have to write the quote for that director, or you are the person
Right.
being
Yeah.
quoted. How do you make it different?
That's a very good question. That is super hard. I've definitely run into that problem before, especially if I'm doing it for like my executive director or something. I would say, you know what can be really helpful for that is if you like have a conversation with someone else about it, and they're kind of like just like, again, that whole like, why should you care thing, but like teasing it further just to be like, get someone else in your audience or your office or like in your space who may not be directly involved with it to like get you to like explain what is going on and like how you feel about it. And sometimes you can generate some like different verbs from that, or like just like a different like feeling on it. You can also have it be, it's okay to be like a little bit repetitive as well, because you'll notice that with like, especially if you have a press release that has like multiple quotes in it, like a lot of them are gonna, you know, you want the messaging to be like the same, right? So like you're gonna get a lot of people who are like, I condemn this, or, you know, this is outrageous or what have you. You can also, I think what I find helpful too in terms of like who I'm getting to like do the press release, because obviously you, or not do the press release, but do the quotes, is like obviously you're going to have like the standard people who like have to be in it, like your ED and these various important people. But like I said before, like having different types of people will generate different quotes as well. So if your ED's quote is like very similar to like the rest of the press release, that's okay. But then if you have supporting quotes that have more to do with like another element of this particular thing. So like, for example, if you're doing like an action about like a protest against ICE as an example, obviously like if it's an organization that organized it, the ED is going to like follow that same language. But then let's say you actually get like an undocumented person to like agree to like say something about it. Maybe they don't necessarily give their name, but like what they have quoted in that press release is going to be very different than what your ED says about it, right? Or if you have like a lawyer, an immigration lawyer, what their perspective on it is going to obviously like be a little different, but like similar messaging. So I'd use like different types of people to help like diversify that content, if you will. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Cool. Yes.
You were talking about politicians, elected officials sometimes appear at events for photo op, and then before you know it, they're gone. How do you seize the opportunity before they disappear?
That is a very good question. I would say become friends with their press people. Like, that's like your best bet. Because even if you miss your chance to like get them, you can pull like Susan aside and be like, hey, you know, like I saw so-and-so there, like can we have a conversation about this? Or like, can I get them to like agree to talk to this like reporter like after the fact, or like something like that. It's also good to not necessarily like call them out, but like if you do see them, you can like, if you happen to like have somebody at that event who's just like, oh, and I see like council member so-and-so is here, like that kind of thing, you can also be sneaky and like do that kind of stuff. But yeah, a lot of times you'll kind of see them. In my experience, at least with council members in particular, those are the most politicians that I like deal with regularly. They will more often than not, if they're actually gonna be willing to like go to something, they are gonna wanna talk, or they're gonna wanna be in front of the camera. If they're sending their like office there, those people are probably like not going to speak. They probably will, but like probably not. It really like depends on like the event and like who's there and what press is there. But if a council member is like actually taking time out of their day to like show up at something, even if they like weren't necessarily part of the planning, they're gonna want to be in front of the camera to be like, yes, I am here, and I want to say this thing. So, yeah.
We use MailChimp to send out our press releases, and it tells us what % of the people opened it. And you know, when we send to a media contact list of 200 or 300 people, a lot are just frankly not opening the press release. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering, either tips on the subject line that might be helpful, or you talked a little bit about kind of having relationships with reporters or media people that kind of helps you get that coverage.
Yeah.
If you could kind of talk maybe about how to do both those things better, like the email actually getting it opened,
Yeah.
and then working those relationships and improving that end of it as well.
Yeah, that's a good transition to the other side of this. So now that you've got all your other pieces to your press release, you can finally work on your headline. Because like I said, save that for last. So there are like plenty of like other tips that you can use, but these are kind of like the general ones that like I found. And what I have found to be useful, like when my organization or in my various work. So like this is, keep it short and sweet. You want this to be shared widely. So you can use Twitter as a guide. Like in this, it says a lot about like using Twitter as an example. If you can't fit your headline in a tweet, it's too long, period. Just cut that shit. So, but thankfully you have, what, 280 characters now? So like have at it. But yeah, so make sure that it's like sweet and to the point. And you also want to make sure that it's powerful. So you're not just using like an active voice versus a passive voice, but you're also using like strong verbs. Like introduces is like something that a lot of people will use, or like, you know, new report finds, like finds is such a bland like verb to use. Reveals is probably like a way, like a better, like, oh, it revealed what did it reveal? Like that kind of thing. So an example, I was sort of sketching out some like examples in terms of like passive versus active voice. This is just like the grammar nerd in me, just like coming out a little bit. So like, this is obviously not going to be a headline, but like a passive voice is like he was hit by a car versus like the car struck him. Okay, so like the car struck him is like way more like compelling and like action oriented versus like he was struck by. So another example maybe more related to our stuff would be, you wouldn't want to say a man was taken by ICE while trying to drive his wife to the hospital to give birth. Instead, you would say ICE arrests man driving his wife to the hospital.
Kidnaps.
Or kidnaps. That's an even better one. Yes. So using like those more like intense words, and also making sure that you are like really thinking about like the true subject of it. So you're trying to call out ICE. So you want ICE to be like in the beginning of that, like ICE kidnapped this man, something like that. So that's what I mean when I say like making it powerful. And also, like Andy said, make it emotional. Like use words like kidnapped, and use like going back to what we talked about in terms of like, who cares? Like, why do I care that this like new report came out? Why do I care that this like action happens? And that's again like using other people, like using people outside of your space to like interact with them and say like, you know, I'm trying to like, would you read this if I like sent this to you, kind of thing. It's totally okay to like ask somebody that. And then number 4, use simple language. So this kind of relates to like number 1 about being short and sweet, but using simple language means that you do want it to be like searchable. So this is like really tapping into like search engine optimization. It's something you may have like heard in various like spaces, SEO optimization or whatever. That was redundant, whatever. This may involve like doing a bit of research ahead of time. Use Twitter as like a great example. What's trending on Twitter that like relates to your thing, and how can you incorporate maybe some of those keywords? Google search your like headline. Like even just put that into Google and be like, oh, what other stuff kind of like came up, and did those have like a lot of hits, or you know, do like a little bit of research into it, especially if you like really want to get like more press to like open something, or if you want to just like get more people to pay attention to something. And then like I said, the last one is make it the last thing that you do. I cannot tell you how many times my ED and I have like fought over headlines because we tried to write them like too soon, and it involved being like, but is this even really what it's about, like what we're trying to say? Because you'll run into that where you're just like, did that even capture like our whole thing that we were like trying to do? And then you know, you go back to the drawing board and you're like, oh no, actually the most important thing about that whole thing I just put out is this. And then you're like, oh yes, that's like so much more interesting. So that's what I would say are like good tips for trying to get those open rates. And also, you know, if you have the time to do what's like called A/B testing. I don't know if you all know what this is, but A/B testing is when you like send something out to like one piece of your audience with one headline or one like difference, and then sending the same, like what in the body is the exact same thing, but like has a different headline to another segment of your audience at the same time. You can see which one gets like more open rates. This is for more like long-term planning if you have like a chance to like do that kind of stuff. But that's a good trick to like do when you're really trying to get a sense of like, okay, what is my audience like trying to like pick up. So like, let's say for example you have a press list of like 200 names that you've collected. It's either like the general mailboxes, but also like reporters you have relationships with. And you're using something like MailChimp. What you can do is you can segment that audience. You can say the first 100 is going to get my press release, but with headline A. And the second 100 people are going to get my same press release, but with headline B. And when we're all done with everything, we're gonna see which headline got more open rates. And then what you can do also is you can do like there are some programs that let you like segment it out a third way, and then you can, whichever one was more popular, you can automatically have it send the more popular headline to like the rest of them. So you could like save your like New York Times press people, or like save your like bigger deal reporters for like getting that like better headline if you want. Like I said, this takes kind of like longer term planning, and you can do, maybe you don't necessarily want to do this with like one of your like really big events that you just like, you're like frenzy like getting it out there, but if you like know that you have something like coming up and you have time to like be able to do this, it's a good idea to start trying that kind of stuff out. But also, you know, even not necessarily in that one instance, but over time, if you're doing like multiple events, take a look and see like which ones were getting like more opens versus other ones, and start taking a look at not just the headlines, but also like what your first paragraph looked like. Was there something about the first paragraph of this press release that just seemed more interesting than this other press release's first paragraph? It very well could be that the press just happened to be like more interested in this other thing that you did versus, you know, the thing that you did on Tuesday. But you know, you can still kind of like take a look and compare and contrast. Maybe think about what was happening at like in the context of like the news of the day. Maybe it was because like, oh, everybody was talking about this like other thing and we wanted something different, or everybody was talking about this thing and our thing complemented that so nicely, and so therefore they like wanted to like yeah.
Besides Twitter and Google, are there any other outlets you recommend using to search for trending topics related to
I'm sorry? Oh, I'll repeat it. So she just asked, are there any other like either programs or like websites you can go to figure out trending topics? Oh, what's the name of that one website? I forgot the name of it, but I will get back to you on that.
That's actually a good point for me to say. We had an email sign-up sheet go around before, so I'll pass another one if you were here for the first one, and we'll have copies of these handouts, contact information for the presenters, any follow-up information. So if you didn't get a chance to sign in yet, please pass this around.
I'm gonna make a note of that because I'm just like blanking on the name of the website, but I can send that around afterward. You can also look at, so sites like these like mass mailing sites also have like some pretty good like free tutorials on them too that I find really useful. They can be a little bit marketing-y, but like what I've noticed at least is I also hate using the word like branding because it's obnoxious as fuck. But like it's kind of like you want to have like good branding, you want to have like good messaging for your like space. You want to make sure that like if you have this, maybe goes to like a bit deeper into like political organizing and stuff like that, but like you want to make sure that like everybody is on the same page in terms of like what message you're trying to convey, whether it's through your press release or it's through like whatever action it is. Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for layout?
For layout of a press release,
Yeah.
I would use this format, honestly. So you know, just and you can have. I would definitely put your organization's logo at the top. I would check with the other people who are being quoted in it. So like, for example, I've done press releases that have like a council member's logo or the city council's logo generally, or the mayor's office will want to have their logo on there. I would just like check, and then you can have them all kind of like scattered across the top. I would make sure that like your logo is maybe like a little bit bigger than everybody else's, so they like know it's yours. Just for like space purposes. And then, yeah, like I said, big bold headline, bigger font than the rest of it, and then like use the kind of like, you know, for a media release, put the date, definitely always put the date. You want to put like the city and state, and then those like 3 paragraphs, do your quotes, and then you can put like your organization's information like at the bottom if you want to just do like about so-and-so place and do like a quick like 2 to 3 sentences about who you are, and then putting like your website and like things like that. That's a good idea to like put that stuff in there if you have the space for it. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, okay. So I wanted to like follow up on what Andy said too about like building those press relationships, which I'm pretty sure the previous presenter kind of like talked about, but something that in my work that I've noticed, especially like bridging this but like bridging the like journalism and journalist part of myself with like the like communications part of myself, is what was being talked about before about like making it really easy for those reporters, but also like really taking advantage of like noticing who is writing about a particular topic that really has to do with your stuff. So like if you are writing in particular about immigration, as an example, check out all the reporters who are like writing about immigration. Like that is their beat, and like have a cup of coffee with them. Just like be like, hey, you know, I work for this organization and we are constantly doing like interesting shit about stuff that you like to write about. Can we get a cup of coffee and I'll tell you all about it? Just ask him. There's no harm in asking. Some of them might totally ignore you, but a lot of times if you reach out to, and I can give you sort of a list of publications, at least in New York, that like my group works a lot with. I mean, I'm also on the associate board of City Limits. City Limits is a great resource. They love covering like good, important shit. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on the associate board. But they are just like a very good outlet, and they're thirsty for like stuff, especially these sorry, I totally don't know the name of like the previous person, so I just like keep saying Marlene. Okay, so she was talking a lot about like TV stations and things like that. Hit up those websites. Like they have to generate a lot of fucking content all the goddamn time. So hit up the City Limits, hit up the like Gotham Gazettes who just got bought by like WNYC. Like make sure that you are like, and you know, and hit up the New York Times if you like, you know, and this could mean like an ongoing strategy that I've done before is I, for my organization, have followed certain reporters on Twitter, and if they post something that they wrote that has to do with something, so an example I will give is like that lending quote that I gave in here, my organization produced a report that was showing the racial disparities in like lending in New York City. And we did put something out about this, and we did a press release, but there was a reporter at Cranes, I would say, who reported on something very similar, but like was referencing either a different organization or like some other kind of like niche story. And so I tweeted at them from my organization to say like, hey, since you wrote about this, you would find this report really interesting, and just gave the link to it. And she emailed me. So it happens. So I would say, yeah, so I would definitely say like get a cup of coffee with them, email them. It's a lot easier to get a hold of those kind of reporters versus like New York Times people, but you can still build up to like have a cup of coffee with a New York Times reporter if you want to. But yeah, I would say, what are some other, like Cranes, like I said, is a good one. These other places, yeah.
We don't do this for every action, because a lot of our press releases are kind of rote, but sometimes we'll do something especially creative, or we'll have some really great quotes, and then we'll post it online. Usually we use Medium because it just has, it just does the layout very well. It looks pretty. People kind of know Medium, and then like do the social media, kind of tweet it and Facebook post it, and like. It's usually like kind of obvious it's a press release because it says press release on it.
Sure.
And the language tends to be very stilted, but is that something you would recommend of just being very public of putting press releases out there?
Oh yeah, totally. And that's a good point too, is like if you like when you're doing your kind of like overall like a like press strategy planning for like an event, social media toolkits, I cannot stress those enough. Like make it as fucking easy as possible as you want for like to get people to share something. Which means a social media toolkit, in case you don't know, is a like package of Facebook and Twitter and let's say like Instagram posts, and you can make images to share with those that are like you don't necessarily have to be like a graphic designer to like make it. If you have one on staff or you know someone, use them. But there's like resources out there that are free that are like image makers, and you can just like pull you can put one of those quotes on Canva. Yeah. Or yeah, Canva. Is that how you pronounce it? Canva. Yeah. Yeah. So Canva.com is great. It's free, and you can make really pretty looking stuff. And it, Canva.com, Canva or Canva. I don't actually know how to pronounce it, but it's free. It's great. You can download an image, and you can just like put that in your like little packet. Literally, just make a Word document or make a like Google Drive folder that has like a Google Doc and like these images in it, and just encourage people to like and make sure. Another good thing to do too is like if you're trying to get either press or you're trying to get maybe like politicians to pay attention to something or some other people, supply their tags in the toolkit as well. Like give their Twitter handles, that's maybe the better way to put that. Give the hashtags that you want people to use, like that kind of stuff. It's okay to like use and reuse the same information, especially if you have like a very specific like messaging that you're like trying to use or you're trying to like wrap up in your like action or whatever it is. So do your media advisory a few days before, have your press release that's basically the same information but with quotes in it, go like the day of, and then also at the same time like have your like people or your networks like sharing stuff on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, like all the big player stuff. A little fun tip, if you're trying to get like the speaker to like notice something, the council speaker, Corey Johnson, he is all over Instagram, so like hit him up on Instagram. Anyway, yes.
2 quick questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
The first, just in regards to paragraph 3, I think, the research one.
Yeah.
Are you citing your research?
So this is from an example of like if my press release is about a report that I'm putting out. So it's like obviously like my data. If you're using like other people's data to support something like an event you're doing or something like that, definitely cite them.
And what format?
You can just say comma according to, and then if you even want to link to it, like you can have links in a press release because it's an email. So if you want to like link to someone else's like information about it, like that's totally okay to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
The second question is just about optimizing the timing of a class.
Yeah. Very good question. So here's my thing. Do not send anything on a Friday. No one is going to fucking read it. Absolutely not. Not even if it's like in the very early morning. I mean, if it's like first thing in the morning, you can if it's like really immediate, but like there's a thing in journalism called the Friday dump, which is like in the afternoon. That's why Trump has been like doing a bunch of shit like in the Friday afternoon, because like they know that like not as, like quote unquote not as many people are going to like cover it or whatever, because journalists try to have a life, and only the weekend editor is really gonna like look at it. But yeah, so don't save yourself. Like don't, even honestly like Mondays are not the best days either, because you have to think about like if I'm a reporter who's going back to like my email and I just like had a bunch of shit sent to me over the fucking weekend, I'm not getting to like what's actually like, I'm not getting through all of my emails until fucking 3 p.m. So don't do that. Send it at 3 p.m. on Monday if you're gonna like do it. Tuesdays are probably the best day to send something. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is definitely the best days. And definitely, if it's for an event that's in the morning, I would try and send it like 8, 9, like if it's like a 10 a.m. action, make sure you're like sending it like close to the event, but also like a little bit before in case they are like, oh, you know, so-and-so go cover this thing that's at City Hall at 10 a.m. One second. And then I would say another great time is like between 1 and 3 in the afternoon, because that's when like a reporter's gonna be like sitting at their desk eating lunch and like just kind of like scanning through stuff. So
And then
that's a
if
good
you're
one.
tweeting, is there a specific time of day when reading tweets more, or just that?
I've done a lot of research on this in terms of like, 'cause there are a lot of places that'll say a lot of different things. It's usually around the same times. Like Tuesday to Thursday are definitely like the most active. There's like a period in the morning that's like pretty active, and then like that afternoon like schlump or whatever word you want to use for it. I think like 4 p.m. is also like a big one, because like people are kind of just like, I need this fucking day to be over, so they'll scan like Twitter.
Obviously, social media.
Social media,
In
yeah,
the
sorry.
weekend, you'll notice like it'll be like a lot. It's a lot less busy if you're on day. Just like yeah, Friday gets like.
It is,
Yeah.
except for Instagram.
Oh, really?
Instagram gets real popular on the weekends.
People do the vacation pictures.
Yeah, everybody's kind of just like seeing stuff. What's like Sunday midday is pretty good for like Instagram. There are a few. I can also share these resources afterward. There's a few places that like have done some like research or reports to see like what are optimal times. But yeah, like I said, it kind of like varies, but those are general practices.
Thank you.
Yeah. You had a question. I'm gonna let her go. And then you, yeah.
Say you're having like a rally Friday at noon. When is the ideal time to send this press release out?
Ooh, okay. A rally at Friday at noon. I would say send it at 10 a.m. But definitely do some legwork beforehand.
Okay.
So that media advisory that we were talking about, which is a
Right.
lot of the same information, it's just maybe not going to have all the quotes and stuff, but instead you're going to have the big names in it that say like, we're having this event on Friday, and I'm just keep using him like Bill de Blasio is gonna be there or whatever, have that go out, like Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah, and then do that like follow up. Yeah. What was you just said something?
So also, I thought also press release, not a release, but advisory, sometimes to get the media out there. I think they also wanted to bring in, like, I thought we used it once, or media organization, communications group to also, I think it was used also to attract the audience of people, like for an event you're having.
Yes, it is. It
Yeah.
definitely can
Yeah.
serve that purpose too.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can.
Like
You
you
can.
can send it out to get listed in different places.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Yeah, you can send it to like-minded organizations or like some other like comms departments at like other places, or if you, or if you're trying to actually like mobilize people to like come to stuff, you can use it for that as well. Yeah. You had a question? I know you're like almost out of time.
Yeah, some of the organizing I do, it's, a group of people. So there's no politicians involved, we're not a 501c3 nonprofit. We're just, people organizing, being active. And so I'm wondering kind of like how do we identify people and how do we kind of make them seem compelling as someone that the public would want to hear from?
Yeah.
If it's like, Susie, who's 34, lives in Brooklyn, and maybe her parents are undocumented, and that's why she's doing immigration activism, etc. But a lot of times we're just kind of people in New York City.
Right. That's a good question. Because I know a lot of you are like also activists, not associated with organizations. I would really tap into the storytelling element. Like really, really pull on those heartstrings, use real people. As they're comfortable, like use photography. I know that we're also like, you have to be careful because we are dealing with like sensitive subjects and whether or not they're like comfortable with these things. So definitely like check that. Another thing too that I would like really stress as well is like authenticity. So a reporter and the general public is going to be able to tell if something is like manufactured or if something is sort of like unauthentic or what have you. So making sure that you're not just like being really true to their voice, but also like presenting it in exactly how they present it to you. So I wouldn't like necessarily like filter them too much. And what I mean by that is like if someone, like an example would be if someone sort of is telling you something that's like in not the most grammatically like correct like sentence, that's almost like okay depending on what it is. Like if you're, and I say this as like, because you really want to, this is something I would use. I wouldn't necessarily use like grammatical errors in a press release. That's not what I'm saying. But like if you're using Canva to like make images to like share about your like event, and you want to like quote one of your like, not famous, but like one of your like supporters or a person who's like directly impacted by whatever the work it is that you're doing, then I would like use their exact quote. Like don't change a thing. Like you really want to like convey what their story is like in a really, really authentic way. And also along those same lines, like representation matters. And so making sure that if you like have a, like if you don't have like important people on that particular like press release, but you have like a group of people that you're trying to like showcase their stories, and you're talking about like different populations, make sure there's actual different populations in that press release. Like make sure it's not like a bunch of like people who look like me on it, So, so making sure that you have those like really authentic voices. And again, this kind of goes along the same lines of what I was saying before. Like, if you think something is important, or you like think like, God, someone needs to care about this, there's probably a good chance that someone else does, and you just want to like really tease out that like why does it matter that like, you know, Susie is like homeless and like we really want to like share this particular story about this person, or that so-and-so was separated from their child, and like really just like tapping into that like emotional element of it, because a lot of times, at least for like the reporters I was referring to before, who are like for these like more alternative kind of like outlets, these more independent media outlets or less like corporate outlets, are actually going to care about Susie's story. Like they don't necessarily care about what, you know, so-and-so politician has to say about like homelessness, but they actually care about like what a homeless person has to say about homelessness. So I would just like think about those types of things. Yeah.